What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here and welcome to a new album review. Today I'm going to be reviewing the latest album from the band Porcupine Tree, entitled Closure Continuation. Closure Continuation marks the band's first album in over 10 years to this point of the band's discography, making this also as the follow-up to their concept album, one-track concept album of The Incident, back in 2009. One of the most prolific, long-time continuing and praised musicians of Porcupine Tree involved has been a really big, effort-driven and productive band at that has been founded by the maestro known as Steven Wilson. Steven Wilson not only in Porcupine Tree for a long time in his career, but he's also been a solo artist with different albums like To the Bone and The Raven That Refused to Sing, etc., but also being very busy for producing different bands' discographies, Opeth being a very big example, to remixing and remastering bands' discographies for the likes of Led Zeppelin, Gentle Giant, Yes, King Crimson, Black Sabbath, amongst many, many more. So with this album, the anticipation for Closure Continuation is very, very high, with the release of a few of their singles prior to this album's release. But when I had been diving into all of these 10 tracks with the deluxe edition of this album, I personally will have to say, while there is a lot of the admiration and purpose with many efforts that's been made into this album, I think that this is not one of those albums that I would personally accept as one of the best albums of the year and not one of the band's strongest efforts. And this is more or less into the return into the more emotional driven impacts that what the band had done before, including albums like Stupid Dream to In Absentia to the critically acclaimed concept album of Fear of a Blank Planet. Porcupine Tree into this album returns into that type of style, though it's not being made as a concept album. A lot of the instrumentation on this record is more or less onto some points very meditative to really complex rhythmic passageways, and they are still at it into a lot on the musicianship because there is a lot of powerful moments across the record, especially into this lineup as a band, because Gavin Harrison's drumming across this material was absolutely phenomenal, really complex to tightness, very adventurous one to these robotic, soothing and chilling keyboards from Richard, and you cannot forget a lot onto the aggressiveness to calmness and virtuoso skillful work with bass guitars to guitars and mixing by Steven Wilson. The first track on the record of Haridan is a very, very good opening track. Pretty touching, and the drums really follow instantly from the start to the finish because it really presents things in like a very mellow type of atmospheric direction until the banging dramatic chorus just assaults your eardrums. Vocally from Wilson, not only from this track but later on, he is very explorative, exploring into his main vocal registers to at points being multi-tracking his own style by adding in some higher head voice vocal registers from his voice box to these gorgeous sounds of vocal harmonies. But I think that Haridan really is quite an irresistible one, and it does paint in various landscapes across the board. Of the New Day is one of my favorites on the album. Not only that it is like an instant booming style like on the opening track, but Of the New Day is the return into like that somber and mellow but still at a innocent, sweet sounding, touching flavor into the whole sound of vocals, to these quite jazzy performances in various guitar chords and sequences that have been applying into what this expression of this track does make. Then on some points later into this track listing of a record, Rat's Return is one of the other deeper cuts on this album because as Wilson described this as about being politicians who would be expressing an interest to the public, but they have their own downward spirals and having their own egoisms, and to think that they save themselves. I think that it's pretty okay into the instrumentation to start things off, but when it goes into it, the more I thought about it, it was a little bit inconsistent, not really one of the other memorable parts of the band's music. And while it is a pretty brutal number, this is not one of the best cuts into this record. Dignity, out of all of the songs on here, is what I see as my personal favourite on the album. Vocally, it has become much more consistent and memorable. The harmonies were staggering and beautiful whenever I hear these pieces that were matching in together. And I think that this does have, to me, the best amount of songwriting, as that this one, while it does have a lot of positions and various sections, the whole purpose on this track is absolutely terrific. Herd Culling I have a very divided opinion about, because while it is more or less onto the anxiety-driven feelings once again, especially into this tension, like onto the chorus where the word liar just comes in, and these assaulting drums with these crashes and bangs and cymbals being so assaulting, instrumentally, weirdly, makes me think of the repetition into the track of the national anthem that was done by Radiohead on their Kid A album. Not that this is a bad song, but it doesn't really fulfill enough for me to deliver the goods just as confidently like onto the first opening few songs. But for me, the weakest one is onto this track of Walk the Plank, electronic driven based. While the synthesizers and keyboards do sound really nice, and the mix to it was just absolutely top-notch form, instrumentally was pretty much forgettable, and not one of those other songs where it does have a standout delivery, though it really makes like a separate form of something very texture driven that I do accept. It's not one of the songs, along with Rat's Return, that I would really go back to as one of the other strong numbers. Chimeras Wreck is the most emotional cut on this album, because lyrically it was based about Wilson's mournful loss of his father, and I can definitely feel the pain and the whole desperation. The vocals to the softer keyboards on the guitars as well, when the vocals go into the lower register and into these higher notes. Instrumentally, is one of the other best arrangements into these performances, into this almost 10-minute track. Population 3 was really dynamic and a fitting one to bring something in like a huge, amazing set of performances. Because of hearing the three musicians together, it becomes really versatile, really, really good instrumental piece. And I think that Never Have, the next track, is very, very nice, which progressive-wise, it's kind of a bit of jazzy in places. You can hear some more of the impromptu or improvisation or whatever you call it works, which Wilson as a lead guitarist does need to get a lot of credit, like on Alex Lifeson of Rush fame to Steve Howe of Yes. But I think that the simplicity of the playing style and the very minimal but still distorting way of tone of lead work from Wilson does make things like a separate vein of identity, and I really appreciate the whole difference in tone as a guitarist from Wilson, as he's really at some points searching many different things that I think do create various imageries. Love in the Past Tense is a pretty powerful finale to really make things at a very big finale and climax. Again, like on Chimeras Wreck, it is a deep one lyrically, really onto the existential reflection, onto the dark side of mortality, and even onto these similar situations throughout this whole majority of lyrics that was put into these pieces from start to finish. into this album in quite a long time, since Porcupine Tree have made multiple different aspects into the circumstances, but a lot of the time they put in a lot of really good efforts. Overall, Closure Continuation by Porcupine Tree, in my opinion, is a solid album, but it is not one of those albums that I would seek into as a big repeatable listening experience. But I do appreciate what this album does have in store. I am very curious to know what you personally think of this album in the comments down below. I'm going to give Closure Continuation by Porcupine Tree a 7.5 out of 10. There's a ton of dedication, there's a ton of definition, but this is not what I would see as a very strong, massive result of a Porcupine Tree album from the start to the finish, yet alone the positives are all here that I do accept. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.